All right, welcome. Welcome to Console Room 2021. You're viewing right now the Star Trek Picard panel, which I'm very excited to be here and to be lucky enough to moderate with some very prestigious participants here. So I'll start by introducing myself, and then I'll turn it over and let each participant maybe introduce themselves and maybe also share a little bit of your Star Trek history, your legacy. Like, how did you get into it? Maybe can be our first introductory round. So my name is Michael Rogers. I've been a Star Trek fan since as early as I can remember, seeing reruns of it in the early 70s, growing up as a small kid, and have enjoyed almost every iteration of it since then, and was really intrigued to be brought back in with Star Trek Picard. And so I'm just very excited to hear how other people are feeling about it. So I think I'm going to pass it to Miss Shannan.
Oh, hi, everybody. I'm Shannan, and I'm a comedian, radio, and television host, and all-around nerd here. I have a podcast called Be Our Geek, and that's where my friend Jayden and I talk about all the things that turn us on as geeks. Let's see, the first time I got into Star Trek is, there was a couple of fandoms that my mom started me on, and so it was the first movie she ever took me to was Star Wars. And then, of course, the first show that we watched together at home was Star Trek. And then it dove into Doctor Who. So I always appreciated that. And I think it was one of the first shows that I remember feeling as though I was represented in, as a young blurred, and not seeing, like being able to imagine myself into whatever it is because it requires imagination, but not actually seeing somebody. So having Nichelle Nichols as I was growing up was highly impactful for me.
Mm-hmm. Awesome, thank you. How about T. Aaron Cisco? You want to go next?
Sure, thanks. I'm T. Aaron Cisco. I'm a writer and producer and huge Trekkie. It was actually my first fandom. Similar to Miss Shannan, the first film I remember seeing in theaters was Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, and grew up watching the reruns of TOS. Was very excited when TNG was announced because that coincided with my discovery of Doctor Who around that same time. I created and run the TC Trek Trivia, which, as far as we know, is still the only recurring monthly pub trivia in the Twin Cities, possibly the States, dedicated solely to all things Star Trek. I've loved every iteration of Trek. I've seen all the series, or all the episodes, all the films, numerous times, read tons and tons of the novelizations and the tech manuals. The Trekkie runs deep.
Well, and I need to ask real quickly, just because you mentioned it, do you have a Klingon dictionary?
I did have a Klingon dictionary for a while, and I was much more conversational in Klingonese in my 20s than I am now, sadly. But, Doc Talk Kapla.
I only remember Jane Bakuchel, which I believe is "Let me stroke your gun." I believe that I got guys. I loose one. That was senior. I was a senior in high school when I did that. Gives an idea of the kind of things I was trying to translate.
Oh, both of you made it further into that book than I did. That's awesome. And then we also have Justine. Justine, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, I'm Justine Mastin. Some folks know me as Justine Yogini. I am a psychotherapist and a yoga teacher. I have a podcast called Starship Therapize, and I have a book now available for pre-sale of the same name, Starship Therapize, Using Therapeutic Fan Fiction to Rewrite Your Life. So pre-order, please. And I did a reading at this con, so I hope you checked it out. I am not in any way knowledgeable about the Klingon language, although I minored in Hebrew in college. I don't know if that's useful. The way I discovered Star Trek was I came to it when Star Trek Next Generation was airing when I was a younger human. And I loved Counselor Troy, which, people have asked me like, oh, did Troy inspire you to be a therapist? And I kind of realized that retroactively, that I think that had an impact on my life. That in this imagined future, our mental health will be just as important as every other aspect of our lives, and that our emotions will be so valued that there will be a member of the crew who is kind of there just for the feels. So that's what really inspired me, and I thought Riker was hot.
I think we'll be able to circle back around to that with our discussion tonight. So that's awesome.
As far as our lasting crushes from Next Generation, mine popped up in Picard as well. So you can have Riker. Riker wasn't my style, so that's fine. So we don't have to duke it out, Justine. You're my friend. I'm glad we don't have to fight.
Good. I'm glad we don't have. I don't want to fight over a man.
Oh my God, that would be the worst. I agree with you. That is a great. Gotta think. Ew.
All right. So, I thought maybe like the best place to start might be with what we love about Star Trek Picard. And so I'm just going to leave that kind of broad, open-ended question and see where the conversation goes. What really struck you? What did you love about that first season?
Can I go first?
Absolutely.
I liked, and I know that this is a thing that a lot of people didn't like, is I liked the pacing of it. I think that with so many of our stories, especially when we're in these geekly realms, it's all built upon the fact that computers are cool now and we can have all these really awesome visuals, which I appreciate. But I think intentionally slowing this down, all except for, we'll say, the very last episode, really made us have to rest and sit with the characters. Sometimes to the story's detriment, but you really had to like sit with it. And that's what I like about series versus big budget films. And when I see something like in 2.5 hours, wow me the whole 2.5 hours. But if I know I have 12 episodes to get to know somebody, I'm willing to take that time and go, well, I needed to know this so I can take the journey along with the characters. So that was one of my favorite things about it. And going, I'm gonna have to wait, because we've gotten so used to with streaming services. I mean, yes, the pandemic rushed some of it out, but when they were like, nope, we're gonna roll this out like Game of Thrones, you're gonna have to wait every week. And we've gotten so used to they drop a whole season and we can binge it if we want. And they were like, no, we're not gonna do that. I thought it was kind of good. Like, it made me flex a muscle that I forgot that I had, which was patience, because who needs patience these days?
That's a great point. And it hadn't struck me until I heard you say that. But I remember the same kind of feeling, like each episode, there was like a layer that was being pulled away. And I too really grooved to that, the focus on characters. So that's, thank you. I'd like to hear from some other
I was just going to say, I would love to piggyback on that, because mine is similar to, well, there were a few things that I loved. But as Shannon was talking, it made me think of like, I loved the nuance in like the set decoration, and, each character had this world, and I imagine future Picard really would have an office like that, and it would have those books, and of course he would have a vineyard called Chateau Picard, and his dog's name was number 1. Like, all those little world building elements, I loved them. And it felt so immersive. And I didn't mind if there wasn't a ton of stuff happening. I was like, let's just hang out in this beautiful study with this dog, and like, could I get more dog, please? So I guess one critique.
You probably like the initial trailers, because number 1 was like one of the first thing they featured, and I'm like, is this all about this dog? Am I watching Benji or Star Trek? Who's this dog?
I would have liked just a little bit more number 1, but it's all right.
And it's interesting that you bring that up, because like, this is a character, Picard is a character that we've known potentially for over 30 years, depending on when you started watching. So like, how many shows do you write or produce or create where the character is intimately known by fandom for over 3 decades? And so, I would like to believe that they intentionally did that for our benefit, that we get to to live with this person, this character that we've loved for so long. Taylor, how about you? What did you love about the series?
Well, similar to what Justine and Ms. Shannan echoed, I love that when you really look at all the episodes in the first season, that's one episode of TNG that's stretched out. Like if someone said, well, what is Picard season 1 about? And you describe the plot, you could easily do the same thing for a TNG episode, but because we're not stuck with the anthology style of writing, we're actually able to let all these little elements, because in TNG, the cold open would be, okay, here is it Ange Stolz? Here's a mystery character who doesn't know who she is, and there's a Borg cube, and now she's being chased, and her lover has been murdered by these unknown assassins, but she has to find Picard, and now Picard has to go to Starfleet, and this, like, that would all be one, maybe a two-parter episode, and then it, culminates as it did. But with Picard, it actually is like, whoa, like this is letting it breathe. But really what I loved the most about Picard, if I had to pick one thing, was the fact that they actually wrote Picard as if time had passed.
Fair.
It wasn't really a reboot or a remake. It was a true continuation, because it wasn't Jean-Luc suiting up again. This is Jean-Luc after decades of being in retirement. Jean-Luc after, as we learned in the first 2 episodes, having some very legitimate criticisms of Starfleet and kind of being disheartened and disillusioned by what it had become and some of the choices it was making. And none of that was brushed aside. He was like, well, I've got my comm badge, let's go. It was more like he was reluctant, he was fearful, he was kind of a prick sometimes, if you pardon the expression, but it was like, this is what he would be. Like, he had his past, and I think that's what, as the fans have grown up with him, like you mentioned, Michael, it felt familiar and comfortable because it was true to the character. It would feel disingenuous if we basically got 70-something. I mean, Sir Pat Stewart is amazing, but it'd be weird to see someone in their 70s, clearly their 70s, trying to play someone in their 30s and 40s, or play the same type of person. And it would betray that character, because Picard was always one, especially compared to, say, like a Janeway or a Kirk, who learned from his mistakes and like took input, and all of his experiences helped shape his further outlook. Where if he ignored all that and was like, no, I'm still the same person I was back on the D going out to Farpoint Station, I think fans would have rebelled against that. So by keeping him like, okay, what would Picard have been doing? How has his attitudes changed? Now let's take that as a jumping off point and have really new adventures, a continuation of the story. I really love that approach and was very, very impressed.
And to piggyback onto what you said, I think, if I did the math right, and this is me sussing from the web, Picard is supposed to be 94 in this series. And so if he was out acting non-94-ish, I would have been really disappointed in that too, as someone who follows superheroes and all these things as well. That's not this franchise, nor is it this character. So I liked, again, if we're not going to do a reboot, if we're going to go, no, this is Picard now, I also like that it was a story in hubris. And we can use the word hubris when we're talking about Sir Patrick Stewart, kind of thing, because he could do that. But him going, I had made it to a particular part in my career. I stood on this particular platform, and then I decided that this platform was more important than all these other things. And, when you get to like the episode where he's all like basically said, then I quit, and they were like, well, then quit. And he just seemed stunned by that, because he's like, that was his "don't you know who I am" moment. And they're like, we know who you are, and bye. And that I thought was fascinating, that, as you were saying, Taylor, he is flawed and did allow himself to get to the point that he stopped learning how to negotiate. He stopped learning how to work with other people and be part of a team. He just stopped and got to this point where it's my way or the highway. And we see that was his downfall.
Oh, it's Fleet Admiral Clancy in my favorite scene. And the reason why it's my favorite scene, just a quick aside, is because we finally got to swear in our Star Trek trivia that we host, because it's canon. We're like, we're not being obscene, this is canon. But when he goes back and he does like what would have been the turning point speech of a different older series, we're like, okay, well, this is against the rules, but you got it, Picard, you're back in. And she tells him to shut the fuck up twice.
Yeah.
And that was the end of it. That was the end of the conversation. It wasn't like, oh, he's like, damn, that was beautiful.
Right. And he just I loved it. And I guess that's one of the things that I like. I feel like that was a realistic response from military people, kind of thing. Like, when they're, if you have they occasionally drop an F-bomb, if we occasionally have them saying the word shit out there, I didn't feel like it was like, oh, look, we're on a streaming service now, so we could swear. I felt like the way that they used it in Picard was appropriate. It wasn't swearing just for, it had an impact because it wasn't all the time. And it was the right characters at the right time when that's what you would say.
Yes.
Well,
that the storytelling, the fact that he had, like you mentioned, the hubris to give a interstellar press conference interview, just trashing the Federation, trashing their politics, and then the show of like, now I need you to give me a ship. She's like, what? Like, I saw you on TV. Everyone saw you on TV. Our TV goes to different planets.
The universe saw you. Well, Galaxy saw you on TV, saying that we were garbage, and then you just walked in here. Old man, bye. That was
yes.
It was his boomer moment.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yes, it was Justine. It was his boomer. He came hobbling in there like, I'm Picard. And they were like, pause that. And I loved that. Because I think that because you had those other beats, like the first time as he's assembling his team, which again was a fascinating thing. Because normally, I feel like when we go through that in this genre and they're assembling their team, everybody's all gung-ho and we know that they'll be the part, especially when you went to go talk to Rafi. Those characters I thought were very familiar in their responses. But I did like that there was more of the, you're on some bullshit and I should tell you no. And the fact that they only say yes for their own ends, that it happens to be a mechanism for them to do what they want to do. Like Rafi wants to go look for her son, 7 and 9, everybody, they don't do it because he's the savior and they trust in his vision. They do it because I needed to go that direction anyway, and this gives me an opportunity to do it, so I'm gonna do it. And it all turns into, now we see what you're doing, and we're gonna do it because we're not terrible entities, humans, since they're not all humans, so they're not terrible beings. So they go, yeah, okay, this is the side of right, and we're gonna do it. But that's not the when he comes around rallying the troops, he doesn't get that immediate buy-in because he's no longer that person that if he says it, it's gospel. And that's one of the things I liked about it as well. And even when he was talking to his former crew members, the fact that he's all like, yeah, I can't ruin their lives and get more people murdered. You can't. No, they don't need to come with you. You're right. Go murder these new people. go endanger the lives of a new crew.
I don't know these people. Take them.
Yeah, these new people, you could go them. The other one, let them hang out. Kind of thing.
Yeah, it's fascinating because to me, then it really sounds like there are lots of like journeys from point A to point B, but the one that you I think are exposing for me is just this assemblage of a team that, like you said, Ms. Shannan, they're all in it for their own particular motivations. But then I'm thinking, and is it okay if we spoil the end of season 1 here? I'm not sure.
Oh, I hope so. If everybody
okay, so when Picard,
spoiler alert, everyone.
Spoiler alert.
For a while.
But the reaction of these characters to Picard's death at the end, to me, was like really impactful. And again, because I love the character and I've been invested with him since 1987. But there's that journey, right? Of they're all picking up and doing this adventure for their own ends. But by the end, they are rallying around Picard. And there's real pain there at his loss.
Right.
And I'm wondering go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say they've moved from, because there is like a lot of okay boomer energy. And they realize that he's not just this old man tilting in windmills, right? He's not Don Quixote. He's got real vision and he really cares about people. And so I love that it's not a guru worship. Right. There is a little bit of like, oh my God, this is, the Picard, the man's a living legend. But they're like, yeah, he's also really old and kind of over.
I like that it's a balance between legendary and infamous, because some people are like, you were the worst and you turned on us. And other people were like, oh my gosh, it's Picard. And it depended on who you ran into. And I like that as you moved into different parts of the storyline, you could see that some of these characters are almost as equal, even though they're not, because like by the time you hear about other characters, you hear them like 7 and 9 was infamous and legendary in what they had going on and those things. And I thought that was fascinating as well, where, yeah, he's Picard, but as you said, Justine, he's still the dude that's a little over the hill, where it's like, well, maybe you should leave this to somebody else, or you got us this far and then you tapped out and left this for the rest of us to clean up. And people seem to resent that. You know, there's like, okay, it was fine for you to tap out when you did, but what did you leave the rest of us? And we were still stuck here picking up the pieces that you left in chatters. And I like that part about the character, instead of having him come back and be that I overcome the big bad of the week over and over and over again, like we would get in the old episodes.
Yeah.
That was one of my nitpicks, Tiny. Not that I felt that Picard, the series, the first season, was sort of like, what if Moby Dick was noble? Like, because it's still a similar obsession with Picard chasing Data, but we didn't get an Ishmael to tell us the story. And I almost feel like Dr. Girardi, who I don't know if I liked what they did with her character. I know I liked the character, but I felt that they kind of threw too much, because at times it felt like, especially towards the midpoints of the season, with her interactions with Maddox and then what she does to Maddox. Well, I mean, if we're spoiling, you know, when she kills Maddox and after she gets to the vision and everything like that, I still like the whole fish out of water element that she had at first. And I think it could have been really interesting to have her be the conduit through which we meet Picard and see, because she was, I think, the closest thing to someone who was like, you know what, I dig what you're saying.
Right.
I'm with you. I kind of see it, but then also kind of like, nah, maybe not. Sort of like Ishmael and was it Ahab? Is that the captain in Moby Dick?
So it's been so long
And
since
sort of like to not have that Ishmael character, and it's fine seeing Moby Dick from Ahab's point of view, but I feel like there are so many times, having now, you know, I've watched the season a few times, and every time I go back, I'm like, oh, you know what, that's kind of shitty, or that was lucky, or that's a little plot hole spackle, because he is such an imperfect character, which makes for a good show. But I think it would have been better to have, not better, but it would have been interesting for someone else to be the conduit. In this case, Dr. Girardi, because she was so pivotal. And so, I mean, she's kind of the hero of the story in many ways, as far as like when you look at where the plot points are advancing, like she's sort of the reason why it happens. And towards the middle, I'm going to, but I loved his obsession, and I love that he was imperfect. But I just feel like, because he was the star, or because he's the primary protagonist, we didn't really get to dig into that a bit. We got people's reactions to him being it, but he never really had to pay for it, which is a Star Trek trope. I mean, that's all the series, except for Disco, maybe. Discovery is the only one where there's long-term repercussions, but...
Right. And Michael, I don't mean to jump on your moderatorship.
Jump away.
I think that our good friend Stacey Smith has a question that kind of ties into what Taylor was just saying, is did they kill off too many recurring characters? And she mentions Hugh and Maddox, who we were just talking about. And I don't think, and here's why. Because I want this show to be a transitional show, and us to be able to have this story expand and not all fall around characters that were legacy characters. So we have one clear legacy character. It's Picard. It's about him, all of those things, which will get me to what my feelings about the final episode when we get to that later. But I do think that there are appropriate ways to have closure for some of these characters. Like I'll bring up Hugh in, Hugh had, I mean, as far as a character that I think that they really developed so well, because, we didn't have, we saw Hugh more than once, but Hugh was still clearly a secondary character if we go back to Next Generation. It wasn't like 7 and 9 where the Queen Borg was following her across all these places and like anything to get her back. Hugh was just hanging out with the little mini resistance and doing that stuff. So the fact that they had that growth arc, and now here's where Hugh is, we have the same actor, and we get to learn that backstory, and then that particular sacrifice happens the way that it is, that I was kind of okay with. And I was okay with all of the deaths that Stacy mentions. These three, I was totally okay with, because otherwise I feel like we get stuck. I think that there is a particular, I don't like it to be like Game of Thrones where we're just whacking characters to whack characters, but I think that there are certain things that show that we live in a dangerous world. Mm-hmm. And this world that Picard is in is supposed to be a dangerous world. So if we don't have characters that we have an appropriate emotional attachment to, if we go back to only killing red shirts, then the world doesn't look dangerous to me. So I like that some of these characters that had a certain amount of longevity, that we knew a certain amount about their backstory, they ended up dying in a way that I thought was appropriate. But maybe that's just me.
I agree with Maddox because he was crucial to the plot. Hugh made sense because they developed him. I thought Ikeb was a waste. I thought that was a little fan servicey, because Ikeb was I wouldn't say fan favorite, but he was definitely a known character in the last 2-3 seasons of Voyager, like the relationship with Seven. And so just to bring him back for really just the cold open, to have him not only killed, but remember, he was tortured first, and then having Seven be the one to have to sort of mercy kill him, that felt too much.
Okay.
Because it didn't feel like it served the plot. It didn't really give Seven additional motivation. She had already been a member of the Fenris Rangers at that point, we come to learn. She's already kind of doing her own thing around the galaxy. So and she knew that, the Romulans and their other co-conspirators were up to no good. Right. So making it Ikeb that she has to kill felt, I don't know if it's fridging. It just seemed like way too much. Like they were like, well, how can we really stick it? It didn't feel, it could have been anyone and just have her be compassionate, because that's what she was at that point. She was someone who was going around trying to do right to make up for the wrongs that she may or may not have done. Yeah, Ikeb was the only one that didn't sit. Like Maddox makes sense, I thought. Maddox makes sense. Hugh makes sense because of all the reasons that you said, Shannon. But Ikeb was just, that felt unfair.
Okay. Fair enough. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I didn't have any strong fandom attachments to any of these characters.
Fair enough. You're sitting there going, you're like, that dude.
Like, oh, that's too bad. Moving on.
Just things like that looked harsh. That was a very harsh way. Close with that thing. I don't know.
And another question that I thought that came through on our chat here: who is everyone's favorite character? And or scene? Are there some standout characters that we've been introduced to here in this season?
Anytime Michelle Hurd turns up in anything, I see. So I mean, and I feel bad because a lot of times I give her the same character over and over again, but I don't care because I love Michelle Hurd and I will watch Michelle Hurd over and over and over again. So I'm gonna say that. But I think as a mom, as a mom of color, like watching this difficult scenario that she has, like it broke my heart when she's like going and talking to her son and trying to say she's clean, and he's basically challenging her because she wasn't there for him, and you can see how impacted she is by it. And that, it wasn't the most action-filled scene, but it was a scene that really, for very personal reasons, struck with me, that she's trying to just have a way to get back into this life and go, I'm doing my best to change. And then to have to come up and go, but I haven't, I'm clean, but I haven't changed. That still was I was right. And to have him not believe her, that all these things were a conspiracy, and she did make the right decision, to have your son go, nope, I'm out, and just turn you away. And that part, that really stuck with me, which I know was early in the season, but I was like, oh, Michelle. I'm very happy. So that was where I still live on this whole thing. There's other ones, but that's the one that I if I wake up in the middle of the night, I'll be like, that was harsh.
Who else would like to jump in? Justine, how about for you?
Yeah, I'm gonna pick a lighter scene. But I'm gonna go with a scene, not a character. I loved the Rios hologram intervention, basically. Because this mimics a particular style of therapy called internal family systems that is kind of my jam, which talks about how there are many parts of us, and just for some people those parts can get so fractured that they don't talk to each other, and that's what you think of when you hear of dissociative identity disorder, which some people think of as multiple personality disorder, and to see all of these Rioses in a room just trying to like piece this thing together, and they all have their distinct personalities, and I really enjoyed that from a therapeutic standpoint.
I just love it. I mean, is it just that anytime an actor does what he did in that one, I am always a big, like when Santiago Cabrera did that, it gave me the same feelings. I'm just so amazed with being able to play that many characters and have it be so realistic. The same way when we were watching Orphan Black and to be able to play that many characters and have it be realistic, and for you to be able to get the differentiation from character to character by one actor, it's like, oh my gosh, you are amazing. And you know, I know that these kind of shows don't get those kind of Emmys. They get things like, I think this one like best makeup or something like that, you know, daytime or a primetime Emmy for that. But I'm going, but didn't you not see all of the things that that he had to do, which I thought was absolutely amazing. So I agree with you, Justine. That's a fantastic scene and just a great character.
Yeah. Taylor, how about for you?
Oh,
Stand-up
man.
characters or scenes.
I mean, I did love the new, well, I shouldn't say that. I liked most of the new characters. I did think that Romulan and Legolas was poorly written. Elnor's, I had nothing against Elnor, but that wasn't Romulan.
I always think Elrond. I cannot get his name right. I call him Elrond all the time.
I mean, they needed the quintessential fish out of water dude that was all like, oh, this nothing makes sense because
But not,
none.
that wasn't a Romulan. Like, Romulans are the antithesis of the Vulcan thought process. Like, he's supposed to be passionate and like, you know, unhinged. Instead, we got Legolas with a dye job, which is fine. No, I liked Captain Rios as this probably the standout character, just because of kind of like what I alluded to a little earlier. Like, he wasn't just sort of like the scruffy kind of bad boy trope. There was like a lot of legitimate reason behind why he was the way he was and all his decisions, and they made sense. And I like seeing that. And I mean, Santiago Cabrera is a phenomenal actor, and the subtlety, like even the way he would address Picard in those early scenes versus towards the end, like he would position himself differently, and there's like he was a really cool character. That said, the best scene, in my opinion, is in Stardust City Rag, when Seven tells Picard, like, no, it's good, man. I got this. Everything's under control. You go back. We'll do this peacefully. And then out come the phaser rifles, and Seven's just like, really, Picard is a 10-episode backdoor pilot for like 7 of 9, because every moment she's on screen, like, she just chewed all the scenery, stole everything. You wanted so much more. And even when she helped him, when she became the Borg Queen to talk, it was like, I want to see what's going on with Seven. I mean, I'm happy they're finding all the synths, and like they got the planet and things are going well, and they figured out who the traitors are. It's like, yo, what's Seven up to?
I love it because I'm just so excited that they gave her so much to do with this series, you know. So I applaud Jerry Ryan. I really am a fan of Voyager for all of the wrong reasons, just because I mean, it's one of those things that I wanted it to be better than it was, because I wanted Janeway to succeed and I wanted that characterization to be available. And then they wrote it dumb, and all of the 7 of 9 shots were just there for her boobs because Kes was boring and all this stuff. So I really appreciated the fact that they gave Seven so much, and that the content was so rich in this show, and you really got to see Jerry Ryan stretch her legs, and the character is so much better than we got in Voyager, for multiple reasons. And I think that that's also, you know, to the credit of the writers and the way that they have taken this series and Discovery, and they've grown into this and allowed the characters to have more dimensions. And I think that that's a quality of the way that we write things now, that's just how it is. And the kind of content that I think that we like as consumers, it can lend to that. And sometimes it goes a little too far. And I think that's some of the backlash that we got from Picard, is that it just didn't do what we thought it should have done if it was Next Generation. But I like that we had a chance for these characters to do so much more. And you really got to see how these actors could play a variety of different, because it was, I mean, this is almost, I mean, it's not quite The Expanse with the layers upon layers upon layers and the things, but it's pretty close. Like, you're like, oh, look at that intrigue. And then that, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And even when you're expecting a show to take a turn, this still had a, okay, are you bad? Are you good? Are you good again now? Okay, you're good
Mm-hmm.
now. Oh, wait, no, you're not good. And I thought that was something that I wasn't necessarily expecting with this series.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I got it, I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe I don't know what's going to happen. Because I think even as a fan of the, seeing the next generation and watching the films, even that would have Sir Patrick Stewart, I still had this expectation that it was going to be same old, same old. So I'm glad that they took another direction with it altogether.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because when I first watched The Next Generation, it was on the first run, and I was in my late teens, early 20s. And so, I mean, I grooved to that idealistic, perfect future, right? And in my, naive young teen, or, young teen and young adult mind, oh, that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
And you get to Picard, the series, and it's like, things have not gone well.
Right.
And for me, it feels very much as a parallel to our real lives. Like,
Right.
The world is in a rough place. And so for me, it's like there was this instant connection between what's happening to Picard in the series Picard and how I'm feeling in this world, 30 some years later, and realizing things aren't always as idealistic, and things have, we've turned left instead of right at critical moments in the intervening years.
And I think shows used to be a lot more entertainment popcorn.
Yeah.
And there's still some times that's what I want. And when I want that, I watch Nailed It on Netflix, because I don't want to, or I watch The Great British Bake Show. I want joy and I want light. And those are what I watch. And those are like palate cleansers. And I consider Picard in between, where it has its heavy moments, but it'll break it up with humor. It's not like going all the way to a Game of Thrones where you're like, this is a dark world and there is no joy. There's no joy in this world whatsoever. If you were looking for joy, do not watch this show. But I also think that it kind of goes to, and Taylor had mentioned this idea of the fact that we live in a world that no longer allows for subtlety. So if we have an allegory that's about race relations and slavery and those kind of things and how it turns everything on its head, we don't get to be subtle about it, because when we were subtle about it before, people went, well, maybe it's not bad. They look kind of comfy. They look all right. Now, it's okay. They're singing songs, with those shackles. That's cool. And so we did subtle for years and people didn't get it. And it became entertaining to see people go through struggles. So now we have to have it be like when Icheb died, harsh. Like you have to kick people in the face so they go, no, this would suck. Torture is terrible. You shouldn't like torture. And it's unfortunate that we got in this world that we're so desensitized by things that you have to make it look so realistic. Like, that probably isn't something you want to do, right?
Right? Yeah. You don't need to hesitate on that question. Think it over and answer it.
I think the evolution of storytelling that you were mentioning, Michael, is like there's always been dark sci-fi and like apocalyptic tales, even in television storytelling. Like a lot of Twilight Zone, and I love Twilight Zone episodes. Rod Sterling's run on the Twilight Zone, those weren't really happy endings. There are not a lot of times where everything works out in the end, but they almost came off, and it's either because of the style or the intent of the way the story is delivered as sort of like preachy or morality plays in a lot of cases, as opposed to, as Shannon mentioned, like the allegories. So now when we get darkness, it's still that escapism, because instead of saying like things are bad and it's your fault and if you don't straighten up it'll get worse, it's more like, hey, things are bad. Like it sort of validates how we feel in the real world if we're in that way. It's less of like, yep, everything is going to be fine, which is also, I think, as a non-healthcare professional, it seems like a disservice to just say everything's gonna be fine. Don't worry about it. Everything is awesome.
Just stop being sad.
Yeah. But also, it's not saying like everything is horrible. I think by saying like, you know what, things are bad. Like what you're feeling is legit and it's valid. It counts. But check it out. Like they're gonna go for it. And so there's that uplifting part. And here's some exhilaration and thrills. It still might not end happy, but at least like you feel connected to it in a way. And that seems to be a theme with a lot of other sci-fi series and things like that too, where there's a very marked difference between like, this is gritty and dark versus this is gritty and dark, but it's not gritty and dark for gritty and dark's sake. It's not trying to shock you. It actually has something to say. Like Amazon's The Boys is a gritty superhero parody, but it's not like James Gunn's Super or Mystery Men even. It's not making fun of it. It's also not saying like, we'll shock you. It's more like, yeah, this is kind of messed up. Like this sort of pop cultural worship and like the way that where we put our values, where we put our attentions. And I think Picard is the same thing. It's not just say like, there's probably a billion, maybe a trillion sci-fi stories where the government is bad and there's some big conspiracy. But Picard's whole thing is, it's not necessarily the government's bad. It's like the government or some elements made some choices that had bad results. But there's not necessarily other options they could have taken. It was sort of like, do you want to get kicked in the face or kicked in the chest? It's like, neither one sounds great. Well, you got to do one or else we're going to cut your head off. So it's like, well, shit, I guess I'll get kicked in the chest. And then dealing with that. But then also when you have a flawed hero who's surrounded by flawed allies who are on a mission that may or may not really be worth it, because there's at no point in his journey to find the piece of data, it's not really a good idea. Like, it's sentimental, we understand, we want him to because we like data, but in universe, like, yeah, man, like maybe you should sit your nuftagenarian, took us down, enjoy some wine, paint some more. Like, do you really want to commit like intergalactic felonies and like put yourself in all
Even your Romley friends, like, let's just chill with God.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, you're right. That kind of sucks, but you don't have to deal with it. And he's like, I do. They're like, no, you kind of don't. You could just chill and tell somebody else to go fix it. And he's like, I won't. And they're like, all right.
Which even that, in a small way, it kind of reflects on like real life. Because I mean, I'm a geek. I spend tons of time on Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, even. I got a TikTok for some reason. And at least 1,500 times a day, I'm like, oh, I can't, I got to, and it's like, do I really need to say something? Does that post warrant a comment? And I'm not saying Picard is the one that, you know, made me feel that, but that definitely helped, where it's like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't talk trash to this particular person or whatever. Maybe it's just
not my job today.
I can just keep scrolling, go have some wine.
Well, sure. I mean, we are faced with these questions all the time, right? We are offered invitations to adventure or to argument or to whatever, and we decide when we're going to pick those up and when we're going to decline. And Picard had that invitation to adventure, and he was like, fuck yes, I'm going.
Because he was bored. I think he was bored and he didn't have any closure, and he was one of those guys that didn't want to be. He knew he should be happy with what he had, but wasn't. Like, I felt like that, I thought, was something that he did have in common with the Kirk of the world. Like, they kept getting promoted, they did all this stuff, but they really just wanted to hang out on the ship and run around. And so when he was like, hey, you're this close to an octogenarian, you need to sit your ass down. Octogenarian? No, a centurion. You're this close to a centurion. Stop moving around. He was past an octogenarian. And he's like, I shall not. And they're like, okay. You sure you want to keep moving around? And now you have a brain thing. You extra should sit down. Oh, I'm not. And I think that's fascinating. And I can see myself being that old person. But I'm like, I need to do all the things. And my kid and my sister will be like, or do less things. I'm like, no, who will do all the things that if it's not me? And it's a flaw. It's just a flaw that you can normally use to your benefit, because it makes you look like you're like a champion when you really are just running yourself ragged and putting your nose in places that somebody else probably could fix too if you left it alone. Everybody was doing things before Picard got there, and maybe it wouldn't have gotten fixed so quickly. So that particular mechanism that it had to be Picard, yes or no? I mean, and I do think it's interesting, and Michael, I feel like we blew off Diana. Diana has been great, and but in 2 questions. She's our friend, so we should at least answer one of her questions. So Diana, I see you. I see you. You are my people.
Is now a good time to pivot to that question?
Yes.
I do want to. I want to. I hate using this term because people use it on me all the time. I want to stick a pin in the following thing. I would love to come back and talk about allegory, because I feel like we've touched on a little bit, but I'm really curious what everyone feels are kind of the big themes that the writers were going for in the season. But we should do some justice to this question here. So Diana had this question. Did we need to have a Riker Troy at their home episode? Was it filler or fan service? And she said, I enjoyed it a lot because I love those characters and those actors, but did we need them at all in the show? So
Yes.
your thoughts on the Riker Troy episode?
Yes, we needed them. I needed Silver Fox Riker. And
I love I was glad that Troy showed up, because at first I was confused that she was Bijel or whatever the evil lady that 7 of 9 choked out. That was her name. At first I was like, wow, they just CGI'd Troy right on up. Now she's evil, and I was like, oh wait, it's a different actor, completely different actor in a different bodysuit. That's a different bodysuit. So I liked it.
Mhm. Yeah, I loved seeing them again, and their happily ever after that wasn't so happy.
Right.
But this was a great opportunity to see Counselor Troy do her thing, right? And do a little of that empath stuff with Daj.
Yeah.
And
I think we need
and we got to.
I think it shorthanded a lot of things, Justine. Like,
right.
Back to a lot of what we're saying about, does Picard need to be doing this? Like seeing some of his veteran crew.
So yes, it was fan service so that we didn't keep going, well, why isn't Picard hanging out with them? But I also thought that it really shorthanded for anybody who had watched the original series that this is this weird ass fool's mission that he's on. That even his most cherished advisors are like, all right, well, here's what we'll do, kind of thing. And that he has to like come to grips with himself, like, I can't ruin everybody else's existence with my weird plans anymore.
Right. It was a good moral compass. It was taking the temperature of, it felt like taking the temperature of morality. Like, oh, did I just draw danger to my favorite humans? Oh, I didn't really stop to think about that at all before. Okay, well, maybe I need to like step outside myself for a sec and see if saving these lives are worth risking those lives.
Well, to me, it felt like Picard was making a lot of choices based on guilt, based on regrets of choices that he had made in the past, and that this journey was really about him trying to right those wrongs. And I feel like that Riker Troy episode helped him to kind of reassess and readjust his compass. Because here you see Riker and Troy dealing with just as much loss, I would say harsher loss, losing their child, and how they were dealing with that in a much more healthy way than he was with the death of Data or some of his other regrets.
Right.
I would say it's anti-fan service, because there's no other characters that could, maybe I'll tell you that, with the exception of Vash or Q, there are no other characters that could have filled that role that Troy and Riker did in that episode. Like and that kind of goes back to what we mentioned earlier about hubris. Like Picard wasn't held on a pedestal so much as he held himself on that same pedestal and saw himself and carried himself a certain way. Some may have been earned, maybe not. That's up for debate. But in order for that to sink in the way that it did, the way that it had to, it couldn't have been Geordi. It couldn't have been Barclay. It had to be Troy and Riker. Because if it wasn't them, then again, the only other options you have left really to get that level of believability that the connection would hit him that way would be Vash, who might be way too deep a cut for the casual fan, or someone for who Picard was their introduction to Trek, or Q. And I think with Q, it would have worked, but like in a way different way. Plus, we already kind of got that with Tapestry.
Yeah.
Back in the TNG run, when he found out what if Picard didn't get stabbed in the heart. Like, so he already had his come to Jesus moment with Q. So that takes John Delancey off the table, which is sad. Love John Delancey, love Q.
And it would have had to been a long circle
yeah.
to get back there, when just, here's a harsh reality that happened to Riker and Troy, and we're dealing with it, and we're okay.
Right.
Why aren't you okay? So, and I use okay as the base level of
continuing your existence, where it's like you go through grief, you go through loss, you have these things, you have, you hit setbacks, and then you decide what you're going to do next, instead of I rest in this moment and refuse to move forward. And I feel like that was a lot of what yes, Picard was living every day, but he was still sitting in that moment. And then woke up every day still in that moment, and just refused to allow himself to process all of those things and go, I can move on. And so he had to go on this incredible journey, this incredibly dangerous mission to be able to move on. And that, I think, is interesting. And when you have a character like Picard, it almost kind of makes sense that it would have to be this apocalyptic adventure with portals and things and alien, to be able to get him to go, I'm gonna let that go. It couldn't just be, I talked to Justine and we figured out how to deal with emotions.
Yeah, well, he was traumatized,
right.
And what he needed was exposure therapy.
Right, here we go. Fair enough. I love it. I absolutely love it. Because Justine takes all my gobbledygook and puts it in actual words that are like healthy. Everything you said was actually reasonable, but here's how take Justine with me more places, because that would be problematic in my experience.
I would love that. I actually think that could be a really fun act.
Yes, I love that. You can make all of my things not problematic, kind of. When I'm like, just get over it, or work through your feelings appropriately, like that one.
So I'm cognizant of the time. We still have 10 minutes, and I want to at least touch on maybe some of the broader themes. We've talked a lot about the character and Picard and his journey, and some of the other characters and their journeys. Are there other allegories within Picard that you guys want to address, or that we should discuss here?
I like the notion of, or the question of self and self-actualization, self-realization, because Suji, I'm never gonna remember her name, Issa Rona's character, she was fantastic, but like she didn't have the journey to getting agency and the importance of that self-actualization. That word probably doesn't mean what I think it means, but it sounds smart, so I'm gonna keep using it until Justine corrects me. Because she put everything into Narek, the Romulan fellow who was actually a spy, and then she kind of like realized he was up to no good, so then she kind of threw everything into Picard, and it was sort of this sort of like, I'm looking for someone to tell me who I am,
right,
kind of thing. And it was subtle. That's why I think it was really well done, because it could have been played like way too over the top or too like melodramatically. And then because we've gotten lots of characters, not just in Trek, but in sci-fi, that are kind of like trying to figure out who they are and trying to discover their past and all the mysteries. So, but with her, because it felt so real, it's like she had also gone through some stuff and she was learning these things, and maybe traumatized is too strong a word, but she was definitely reeling from all this new information, the new strangers, new abilities that were being triggered, and like not knowing where to turn. So it's like, all right, well, he seems cool, I'm gonna latch onto him. And again, I'm definitely not gonna try and medically diagnose what that's called, but when you experience something, so you look for romantic fulfillment or carnal relations, but then that didn't work. So then she went for more of a paternal type of thing, and then kind of like the white savior kind of thing, and none of it really worked out until she was kind of like, wait a second, like, you know what, F all y'all, like I know who I am now. And that was kind of like a nice, very like on the back burner, but running throughout the entire series.
That was all actually very intuitive from a psychological perspective. Because when we have an identity crisis, which one comes first, Soji or Daj?
I think Daj
comes first. Okay, so Soji's the one who questions reality. Great.
Right, Daj was the one with the hood that was in the picture. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So Soji, has a sense of self, and then realizes, I'm not the person I thought that I was. And what does that mean? Who am I? And we do this all the time when we're trying to figure out who we are, and we start trying to make other people be ourself.
Right.
Like, this person will be myself. They'll tell me who I am. And eventually you start, after you test that out for a while and realize none of those are self, you start to figure out who you are. So yeah, you were right on.
Oh, look at that.
Good job.
Well,
and I wonder too, like,
here's your honorary diploma.
I wonder too, like at the end when Picard dies and they download him into his android body, I felt like the writers were like putting it back in my face. Like this whole time I've been led on this journey of, yeah, you know, that Soji is a person. She's an entity. She's real. She's alive in every other sense that every other person is. She has agency. And then they do that to Picard. And all of a sudden I felt like, oh, wait a second. Have I been giving lip service to this? Have I been saying it because she's not a character that I relate to because I've just known her these 10 episodes. But when they stick Picard in essentially the same position, I felt myself going, well, yeah, Picard's there. You know, it's not his organic body, it's a different body, but he's there. And I've always wondered if that was intentional or if it was just, you know, I don't know, kind of a backdoor out for the writers to get themselves out of a corner. What are your thoughts?
I mean, when I was watching, because I watched a lot of the behind the scenes stuff and the conversations that they had with Will Wheaton, who was like doing the interviews, and I feel like a lot of this was intentional. And I give them a lot of credit, just like I give the writers and the directors of Discovery a lot of credit for trying to figure out ways to get there. And so that makes it okay when they have this weird magical technology that fixes the ship basically with a genie blink and all that stuff. So that's why I give those license. I give those things okay, because the technology was very wibbly wobbly there at the end.
Yeah.
And they just had to get someplace. And I'm like, okay, fine. You know, technology that's so amazing is magic. I get that. I didn't make up that quote. I don't remember who I'm misquoting right now, but I get that. But I also think that it's because we were focusing on what the characters were doing. So since I was interested in what you just said, Michael, and those things that happened, I was okay, kind of thing. Larry thinks that was Isaac Asimov. It may be, Larry. That is a very well-known quote that I didn't completely butcher, but absolutely Miss Shannan. But I do think that was why I was okay with it, because I was so caught up in what the characters were doing and why I thought it was okay. And I was, you know, from a perspective of trying to really know, like, I think there was a practical reason why I wanted Picard to die and be in a Gollum baddie, and just a silly reason. One, Sir Patrick Stewart is 1 million and Picard the character is 94. This gives them room to carry on the Picard series. He's in a Gollum, this body falls down, we put it in another one, young dude without rebooting it. So the no person kind of thing. So that I like that idea. I think that's a very functional mechanism. To go, all right, we're in a Gollum, because then we also, if for some reason they decide to have the Picard character do something that's a little more physical, we can go, well, the Gollum gave it a little extra juice, and they can add in other wibbly wobbly science that goes, well, every time he does something super, you know, fancy fencing thing, it degrades the Gollum a little faster or whatever. But we now have a scientific method to be able to add in more action scenes in season 2 if we elect to. So I thought that was smart and actually created a non-corner for them to be able to do stuff in the next season.
Now I'm watching the time. We've got about 3 minutes, so I want to make sure that we wind down in an appropriate time. And I want to give this question some due thought. So I thought maybe this could be the question that we kind of round out with. And you mentioned, Miss Shannan, season 2. So I'm curious what each of you are hoping for, or maybe expecting from Picard season 2, which I believe is filming right about now, or they're gearing up for it.
I think they put it off. It's
have they postponed?
because it's postponed because of COVID and everything else. So we're still in a to be determined phase, I think, with this one.
So if anyone's listening, then they might take on our ideas right now.
Maybe.
Production crew.
I guess I'm kind of curious about, you know, do I want to super follow all of the synthetics, or do I want to follow Romulans? Because I liked Romulan. What did you call him? Romulan?
Legolas.
Legolas. I mean, I like that. Who are the real characters? And that was a problem before. I like that concept of how do we continue to build towards, these are no longer our primary villains. So are we going to figure out how to continue to work them in or not? So I like that redemption story as well, and what we continue to do with that. So I would be curious to follow that.
Taylor, what are you looking forward to for season 2?
I want to see more of the XBs and their reacclimation into society, because I feel like if we're going to keep with the theme of sort of mirroring current events, they were kind of like a lot of people say that season 1 was kind of dark. And so the mirror of the current events is like we had a few years in reality that were kind of dark. And so now we can't just flip a switch in a week or so and then everything's going to be good. There's a lot that has to be done to get there. So I'd love to see like, all right, well, now we know that since they're here, we've got a Soong type android with the consciousness of a legendary Starfleet captain. And we've got the XBs and all this other stuff, the X-Borg going around. How are they going to move forward now?
Right.
And I would love to see that. And then for the conflict, bringing in sort of like the real conflict, like not necessarily like a big bad, but just folks with different ideas that are willing to go to certain extremes. And you can have your extremist part too. I think we got that pretty well taken care of in season 1. So I'd love to see something more subtle where it's just like a strong enough disagreement where neither side has the correct answer. They just both have their answers. And so the audience can see both sides. So like where the antagonist isn't wrong because they're evil, they're just, maybe they're wrong because, oh, this doesn't make sense to me, this doesn't make sense, but I see why they would go that way. I think that could be some compelling television, especially when you layer on top of, well, now they're trying to rebuild the Federation and trying to regain trust with the synths for the general population on all these different planets and member worlds. And we've got XBs floating around. The Borg have been, you know, the demons, like the literal demons of the galaxy at this point for over a century. How are they going to work to be acclimated? And everyone's got to get along and then to have really, so sort of like a political thriller with a little bit of like real weight. So it's less Michael's Aaron Sorkin and more like almost a Stanley Kubrick type thing.
Cool.
I have two thoughts, but I'm just gonna I have two thoughts, but I'm gonna go with the more therapeutic one since we only have a minute, which is I would like to see the Picard bot come to terms with his own identity and what it means to now be in this synthetic body and grappling with was that supposed to be the end of my time, and how do I make sense of eternity as someone who has been a literature scholar his whole life? And you know, all stories end, and what does it mean to have this continuation of my story?
Wow. See, now I can't speak for the audience, but the three of you have me so jazzed up to watch the card season again. So thank you. I'm so glad that I signed on for this panel. So I want to thank each of our panelists.
Well, thank you for suggesting it, everyone out there. Michael was the one who suggested this panel. So round of applause to Michael Rogers for bringing this up.
My nerd cred right there. So if you are watching this, please like this video and subscribe to our page. Console Room is happening virtually January 15th through January 17th. And you can find out all things that are happening by visiting our webpage. And that would be www.console-room.com. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a wonderful evening.